Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneDrop, created for people with diabetes by people who have diabetes. By Gvoke HypoPen, the first pre-mixed auto-injector for very low blood sugar. And by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, she was playing the cello before she went to kindergarten. In fact, when Alisa Weilerstein was diagnosed with type 1 at age 9, her first thought was her instrument and her fingertips.
I was already quite curious about the cello, and the left hand, of course, is the hand that goes on the fingerboard. And I remember saying to my doctor, I'm not going to prick my fingers on my left hand, so I won't be able to play.
She was certainly able to keep playing. Carnegie Hall at 15, the White House at 27, and at 29, Weilerstein was awarded the MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant Fellowship. She has quite a story. It was great to talk to her. In Tell Me Something Good, Girl Scouts stepping up. And did you hear the Dexcom at the Supreme Court hearings? This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of Diabetes Connections. I'm so glad to have you along. I am your host, Stacey Sims, and we aim to educate and inspire by sharing stories of connection. If you are new to the show, I am so glad to have you here. A little bit about me. My son was diagnosed with type 1 right before he turned 2. He is almost 16 now, so it's been a minute. My husband lives with type 2. I don't have diabetes, but I have a background in broadcasting and local radio and television, and that is how you get the podcast. I am always amazed when I meet and talk to people with incredible musical talent, like our guest this week. To me, playing music, reading music, expressing yourself through music is like another language. I appreciate music, but I don't have that kind of innate understanding that a true artist has. My old radio show co-host, when I did mornings in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I am now for more than 10 years, and he was also a musician, and they just have this natural ability. I mean, a true musician who can write music and read music and play by ear. To me, it really is something special. And I hope I did this interview with Alisa justice because, of course, we're interested in talking about diabetes, but we talked about music as well. I also want to let you know we are not out of November yet, Diabetes Awareness Month, of course. We've been doing some fun things on social media. I have a big sale going on for the world's worst diabetes mom, real life stories of raising a child with type 1 diabetes. It is on sale right now. Use the coupon code November. You've got to use it on my website at diabetes-connections.com. I can't do coupon codes on Amazon, sorry. But this covers more than free shipping and everything else. So it's still a nice discount. We're doing $4 off for the rest of the month. So go to the website, scroll down. You'll see the book in the middle of the page there under the most recent podcast episodes. And to use the promo code, you're going to click Order a Signed Copy. The other links take you to Amazon, and you can't use a coupon code there. But if you click on Order a Signed Copy, it'll take you to the right place. There's also a little teeny tab on top that says Shop. It's hard for me to believe the book has been out for a year. I hope you're not tired of me talking about it. I got one nasty email this year I will share. Somebody stopped listening to the show 2 weeks after I published the book because he was tired of me talking about it. I felt like saying to him, you write a book and see if you want to talk about it. But I appreciate you, putting up with it, especially this year when the whole book tour was canceled. I was supposed to, like many of you, right? We were supposed to travel and go places and do things. So, I get it. Of course, everybody's in the same boat. But I am going to continue to talk about the world's worst diabetes mom because, man, it was so much fun to put together. And I'm not ashamed to say the response has been fantastic. So if you want to get a copy, promo code November at diabetes-connections.com. Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneDrop, and getting diabetes supplies is a big pain. You know that. Not only the ordering and the picking up, but the arguing with insurance over what they say you need and what you really need. Make it easy with OneDrop. They offer personalized test strip plans, plus you get a Bluetooth glucose meter, test strips, lancets, and your very own certified diabetes coach. Subscribe today to get test strips for less than $20 a month, delivered right to your door. No prescriptions or copays required. One less thing to worry about. Not that surprising when you learn that the founder of OneDrop lives with type 1. They get it. OneDrop. Gorgeous gear, supplies delivered to your door, 24/7 access to your certified diabetes coach. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the OneDrop logo. My guest this week has been living with type 1 almost as long as she's been making music. Alisa Weilerstein has a remarkable story. She debuted with the Cleveland Orchestra at age 13, played Carnegie Hall at 15, performed at the White House at 27, and then she was awarded the MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant Fellowship when she was 29 years old. I found her Tiny Desk concert, if you're familiar with those, from NPR, and that was 10 years ago. I will link that up as well. She is currently in Europe, where she and her family live for half the year. I spoke to her, it was back in September, when she, her husband, and their 4-year-old daughter had just traveled back to Berlin from San Diego. Alisa, thank you so much for joining me. It's so interesting to talk to you that you're in Europe. We've got a little bit of a lag here on the call, but thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for having me on your show.
Before we jump in and talk diabetes and music, tell me a little bit about living in Berlin. You live there half the time now.
Yes. Well, I mean, I'm a cellist. So I play classical music, of course. In normal times, I play about 120 concerts per year, and they're split between Europe and North America with an occasional trip to Asia. Of course, during the pandemic, that's been radically changed, obviously. But that's my schedule during normal times. And so it was very important for both me and my husband. My husband is a conductor, to have a base in Europe as well, so that we're not just constantly on transatlantic flights more than we actually need to be. So we have a base in Europe, which is Berlin, and it's such a great center for the arts, and our daughter loves it here. Our daughter was actually born here 4.5 years ago, and yes, that's one reason why we chose Berlin. I'm curious what the flight was like and what the experience was like traveling from the U.S. right now with everything that's going on. Well, it's interesting because we spent most of the pandemic in San Diego, so we were there from March 13th, basically, the day that all of the borders shut. And I actually traveled to Germany in June to play a live broadcast in Hamburg. At that time, it was a 2-week quarantine in Germany, and so I quarantined here in my apartment in Berlin. And at that time, it was even more sort of wacky to travel at that point than it was a week ago when we flew back here from San Diego with my whole family. At that time, I mean, there were so few flights, and there was practically no one in the airports. So I flew from LA to Newark. Of course, you don't take your mask off your face, obviously. And even though there were like 10 people on my flight, and not more than that. And then I had 10 hours in Newark, and then I flew from Newark to Frankfurt, and I got a test immediately upon arrival. They were even doing testing at the airport at that time. And then my results arrived within 48 hours. I tested for the virus and also for the antibodies, which unfortunately I didn't have the antibodies. I was actually disappointed. But anyway, I flew back to San Diego to rejoin my family, and then my whole family, so my husband, my daughter, and also our daughter's nanny, we flew back to Berlin. Again, it was very few flights. It was San Diego, Chicago, London, Berlin, with a 4.5-year-old. You can imagine was oh my gosh, it was not the easiest. So, but we tested literally before we went to the airport. We went to a lab to test, and then we got tested at the airport in Berlin Tegel Airport. They were doing testing upon arrival, and those results came within 24 hours, and the test was free when we got here. So my girl was able to go to school right away here, which made her very, very happy. That's great. Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad. I'm sure you're all glad to be settled. Oh yeah. 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 So let's talk about type 1. You were diagnosed at 9. Do you remember your diagnosis story? Oh, yeah, very well. Yeah, it was actually the month before my 10th birthday. It was March 1st, 1992. And as you remember, of course, 1992 was a kind of critical year in diabetes research, which definitively proved that tight control could ward off the risk of complications by, whopping percentage. I mean, 66%, less likely to get complications if the A1C was 7% or below. So that was encouraging. But my diagnosis story was essentially for the couple of months leading up to my doctor's visit, I exhibited the classic symptoms. I was urinating frequently, had extreme thirst, and I was losing some weight. And I've always been a kind of muscular body type, and I suddenly became, sort of like ballet dancer thin. And even though like my energy was okay and it was actually sort of normal until like about I remember like a few days before I went to the doctor, and I was just feeling just sort of tired, which was very unlike me. And my mother took me to the pediatrician. She said, maybe you have a bladder infection, because I was, going to the bathroom every hour or something like that. So I remember we brought a urine sample from home, which the doctor had asked us to do that. And so, I peed into a jar basically, and we went to the pediatrician. And sorry,
oh no,
nature of that.
It's a type 1 diabetes show. We talk about peeing all the time, drinking, losing weight.
Exactly.
It's all part of
it's a diabetes podcast, so I'm sure your listeners are familiar with this. And so, anyway, I submitted the sample, and then I remember the doctor, whom I liked very much, actually took my mother aside, and sort of there was some whispering which I didn't know about, and then my mom looked very serious, and she said to me, "Well, the doctor thinks the jar was contaminated, so just give her another sample." And so I went to the sterile bathrooms and gave her a sample from a sterile cup, and unfortunately the result was the same, which of course showed sky-high glucose. And the doctor said, "Well, you need to go straight to the ER." And the doctor told me, he said, you need to get a blood test. And so I thought, I don't really like. And then I remember asking my mother, I said, "Well, can I at least get some M&Ms afterwards?" And my poor mother, she didn't know much about diabetes, but she heard the word diabetes mentioned, and she knew that meant a sugar issue. And so she just kind of looked at me, and she opened her mouth and she closed it again. And and we drove to the hospital, and then the rest was really kind of blur. My father, I remember my mom calling my father saying, "You need to get here now." And my little brother at the time was 4. And I remember them all kind of standing around me, and I was getting weighed. And then suddenly I was like on a gurney with IVs and needles sticking in and out. And then doctors coming in and saying, "Yes, we think it's juvenile diabetes." And of course, somebody was examining my tongue to see how dehydrated I might have been. And yeah, it was very kind of dramatic. My blood sugar was 464. At the time, they said that actually we caught it relatively early, if you can believe that. I think at that time, some kids were coming in already, the 800 or something like that, coming into with, really rather advanced ketoacidosis. And I wasn't there yet. I was throwing some ketones. It wasn't yet in kind of a dire situation. Anyway, I was then in the hospital for about a week just for the kind of diabetes education, and it was kind of a crash course on how to manage type 1 diabetes. And at the time, my insulin regimen was NPH and regular for the fast acting, because it was even before the time of Humalog. And my blood sugar meter took 45 seconds to read blood glucose results and counting carbohydrates and all of that stuff. So this was my diabetes education.
At 9 years old, you were already on your way to playing music and performing.
Yeah.
And, did anyone say anything? That had to have been your first question, right? Can I still do this? What did they tell you about your musical career? Right back to Alisa, and she's going to answer that question. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And they have this great partnership with Tandem now with Basal IQ and Control IQ. And we started on Basal IQ as soon as it was available. And this is the Dexcom G6 Tandem Pump software program. And immediately started doing less work for better results. When we switched to Control IQ, oh my gosh, even less work, even better results with diabetes. I don't know if you remember, but years ago, they started with just putting the CGM information on the pump. It didn't communicate. It was just there. But this is something else. The whole system keeps Benny more steady. His time in range has increased significantly. His A1C, I don't share exact numbers, but it's the lowest that he's ever had. Of course, individual results may vary, but to learn more, just go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Right back now to Alisa sharing what she was most worried about at her diagnosis.
Well, this is why I say 1992 was actually, if one had to be diagnosed with diabetes at any time, it was an encouraging year to be diagnosed, because, the doctors who actually were well informed said, if you manage this well, you will be able to live exactly the life that you want to live. And that was the constant messaging from my doctor at the time. All the nurses around me said, look, this is, and they were teaching me how to do things. And he said, this is the reason you have to do this, is so that you can live a full life and do all the things that you want to do. You can play the cello, go to school, see your friends, play sports, do all of these things. And I remember there was just one issue where I kind of had to make a special accommodation, which is with the finger pricking, because of course I was already, as you say, I was already quite serious about the cello, and the left hand, of course, is the hand that goes on the fingerboard. And I remember saying to my doctor, I said, I'm not going to prick my fingers on my left hand, so I won't be able to play. But however, if I was able to prick my fingers on my bow hand, it wouldn't have affected that. So I only used 3 fingers to prick. And my whole life after that, I only used the same 3 fingers to prick my finger, to test my blood sugar. And luckily, they accommodated, and they're basically, well, as long as you do it and as long as you don't hurt yourself, sure. That was the answer.
I was going to ask you about that because I couldn't imagine, especially the amount of finger pricking you had to do back then.
Yeah.
So listen, for somebody who nagged her son for years to rotate fingers, do a different finger.
Yeah.
You were able to just move it around enough so that you didn't have issues with just those 3 fingers.
No, I didn't. And even at the time, I mean, the lancets were very good, very painless, and very thin. So, I mean, there was never an issue. And I mean, at the time, the recommendation was to test 4 times a day. I remember at the time that was considered like being very responsible. Of course, now we would probably say that's kind of bare minimum. But as I got older and I tested more often, I mean, I was up to before the continuous glucose monitors were accurate enough to kind of rely on, I was testing 10 times a day, and I was just using those same 3 fingers.
That's so interesting. And, you've mentioned it a couple of times, 1992. We should just step back and mention, as you listen, if you're not familiar, we're referring here to the DCCT trial, the Diabetes Control and Complications trial, which was really the first time, as you said, that they believed that you could make a difference. I mean, it's hard to believe that before that time, doctors thought, well, that's it. If you have type 1 or juvenile diabetes, as they called it, you wouldn't live past 30. And this showed that you could.
Yeah, and you would kind of have to go to an alternative doctor to get anything more hopeful or any kind of agency with it, really.
Yeah, and I'll link up more information on the DCCT. It was such a pivotal time in diabetes, and it wasn't that long ago when you think about it.
No.
All right, so you are then on your way. You're doing what you need to do. You've got your family on board. You're playing music. Cleveland Orchestra at age 13 and on and on. And I have to say, when I watch someone play the cello, and please forgive me, I'm so musically ignorant except that I enjoy listening. It seems like it's very athletic. It's a very physical looking instrument to play. Can you talk about that? I'm assuming that
Yes.
It is.
Oh, yeah, completely. And especially, I'm not very tall myself. I'm about 5'2", if my posture is good. You know, you have to learn how to use your body in a very efficient way. Like kind of a lot of Alexander technique and yoga concepts can apply very well to, well, pretty much any instrument, but kind of the cello, especially in terms of the strength that it takes. And truly free with the instrument, you have to basically use your body to know how to use the natural energy and not natural body weight very well. And of course, it just takes a lot of years of practice to build it up. I mean, there's no substitute for time really with that.
You must have by now a routine, and you the physicality of it. You've got that down. But when you were younger and first learning, what did you do? Did you keep tabs like in your chair or in your case? Or, how did you manage diabetes and playing?
I mean, I kept glucose tablets pretty much everywhere. Playing the cello itself did not cause low blood sugar. I mean, there were a couple of pieces that I knew were kind of workouts in a way, and that I would sometimes eat a little bit or maybe drink a little bit of juice before. I mean, like the way you would before going for a run, just to have like a little bit of energy and to make sure that you have a threshold that can kind of carry you through it if you were going to drop a little bit. So it was a lot of trial and error, and I just found out kind of what worked. And I mean, in terms of going on stage, especially before the pump, certainly, which I got on a pump when I was 16, so that was 1998, and certainly before the CGM, I would test before going on stage. I mean, I would just test in general much more on concert days than on other days. And I always liked to get to the hall about an hour before so that I could slowly put the gown on, slowly kind of put my ducks in a row in terms of playing and just warming up slowly and kind of just getting myself in the mental space. But it was also blood sugar wise, it was just important for me to be able to test 1 hour before, kind of every 15 minutes, and then like 2 minutes before I'd walk on stage, just to make sure that I was not going to get low on stage. I mean, like if I was 170 or something on stage, it wasn't ideal, but it was better than being 65 when you're going on stage, because of course below that, then you kind of start to lose coordination. I mean, my ideal number to go on stage would be like 130, because the blood sugar is maybe slightly on the high side, but it's good enough that I felt normal and I had a threshold to drop, so that if I walked off stage and I was 85 or something, like that would be fine.
You mentioned there were a couple of pieces that stand out as being more physical, or can you share those with us? I'm curious anything stand out?
Sure. There's a concerto, which means that there's a solo instrument with an orchestral accompaniment. And the composer is Prokofiev, who was a Russian composer who actually died the same day that Stalin died.
Oh, my.
1953. Yes, the same day. So, of course, nobody paid attention when he died, unfortunately, because it was one of those really, really tragic ironies. to add to so many tragic ironies of the time. But he wrote a fantastic masterpiece for cello and orchestra called the Symphony Concerto, which is a symphony concerto. It's a 45-minute kind of tour de force for the cello and for the orchestra as well, but especially the solo cello, which is just wild, very, very, very physical, technically very, very challenging. And it's just kind of an endurance exercise. And I remember just being very sure that I was not going to get low on stage. So I did a few practice runs of that piece. The first time I played it in public, the first time I played it with the orchestra, I was about 16 or 17 years old. I did several kind of practice runs, just running through with a piano reduction for friends and for my parents and things like that. So I knew kind of what my blood sugar threshold was with that piece in particular.
That's funny. With Prokofiev, all I know is Peter and the Wolf. That's what I think of.
Yes, of course. No, this is what I play for my daughter all the time. Peter and the Wolf is fantastic.
That's funny. Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
You know, at this point, it's almost like a professional athlete in terms of, I assume you have the routine, you know, look, at this point, you know what you're doing. I'm curious.
God, I hope so.
Well, right. But anything throw you for a loop in terms of diabetes these days? I'm thinking about advice for, you know, younger people who are starting out in a musical career or, you know, just anything like that. So what throws you for a loop here and there?
Oh, well, sometimes I can have a very inconsistent response to stress or to nerves because generally speaking, I don't get nervous on stage, but perhaps a kind of travel situation, especially these days, can make me quite stressed out and, you know, let's say high strung and nervous. And then my blood sugar just shoots up sort of out of nowhere, or it can be like a kind of a sticky high and I can't get below 185 no matter how much. I mean, like I feel like I've got an IV of insulin and nothing brings it down until I relax. That can just sometimes be really kind of flummoxing and very frustrating. And then, of course, I get more stressed about the blood sugar. And then, of course, the stress response doesn't go down. So that's something that I just find very frustrating and something that I feel is kind of out of my control unless I kind of just force myself to do some deep breathing in a kind of airport travel situation, which is stressful. Other things that life can throw your way, unexpected things, I just find, you know, test, look at the CGM as much as possible. And then you can catch the kind of unexpected highs and lows much, much more easily. And so that's my advice to anyone. Just test as much as possible. Or if you have a CGM, just make sure that you're really aware of what's going on there.
Can I be nosy and ask where you wear your technology during performances?
Of course.
I'm trying to think the body motion and where it's, you know, where it makes sense to wear it.
Well, not on my arms, as you would probably imagine. I put my infusion set and the sensor on my stomach. And when I'm wearing a gown, I'm not sure even which company makes it anymore, but I think there's the Diabetes Mole, which has something called the thigh thing. And it's kind of like a garter belt. And it has a pocket, which is where I put my pump when I'm wearing a dress or a concert gown.
Right. You've mentioned your daughter a couple of times.
Yes, I did.
Were you concerned? Obviously, you know, it takes a lot of work when you're wanting to get tight control before you get pregnant. I'm curious. It sounds like your doctors told you from the get-go that you'd be okay. Can you share a little bit about that journey in terms of, you know, deciding to have your child?
It's something that was kind of hanging over my mind, and that's a personal thing. It's just not to say that, oh, you get a diabetes diagnosis and you worry for the rest of your, let's say, the rest of your childhood and teens, whether you're going to be able to have a healthy pregnancy or not. But I did actually have that kind of worry. And I would say I spent probably 2 years before we decided it was the right time to try and conceive, just kind of experimenting to see how tight I thought I could get the control, especially with an intense travel schedule. And I found that at the time, the CGM was getting better and better. Like, as you know, back in, 2008, 2009, the CGM was maybe 40% accurate at best. I mean, it was just terrible. I was like throwing it against the wall sometimes because it would just, if I took Tylenol or something, it would go up to show that I was reading 400 because it didn't react well to acetaminophen and other things, and it would fall off, and it was just awful. So like about 2 years before, my daughter was born in 2016, so this was like 2014 or so. I mean, my A1Cs had been in the low sevens at the time, and then I got them down to 6.8, 6.6, and I thought, okay, I think, I'm going to be able to manage this, because I was doing a lot of fine tuning, and then and your son will probably relate to this, like the more you pay attention, the worse you actually think your blood sugar is, but it's actually, your blood sugar is actually getting much better. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so this was something that I realized, and my doctor was telling me I was doing amazingly, and I was like, really? I don't think I'm doing, and then I saw, oh, my average was like 129. So, oh, well, okay, that's not so bad. But I mean, of course it needs to be better than that for pregnancy, but this is in range. I could finally envision, having an average of, 110 or something like that. And so we got pregnant, and of course the pregnancy itself is, the biggest motivator. And of course I was poked and prodded more than I care to remember during the pregnancy because, of course, I was classified immediately as high risk and I had to see the doctor, all the time. But I was working and traveling until 35 weeks.
Oh, wow.
You can find a YouTube video of me during my second to last concert with Ariadna, my daughter, in my belly. I played Hindemith Concerto with Frankfurt Radio Symphony, and my belly was absolutely huge. And then, I'm walking on stage with this thing, and I saw myself and, wow. I mean, I remember what it felt like, but seeing it now after with some distance, it's kind of amazing to me that I did that. But it was important to me to keep going, and I generally had a very easy pregnancy until the very end. And I felt best, and my blood sugar was best when I was active. I was under the strict supervision of my doctors, but I managed to do that.
How do you talk about your diabetes with your daughter? What does she know?
She knows in a very general way. If she sees me drinking juice, she knows that I'm low because I don't drink juice otherwise. She knows that I have diabetes. She knows the word diabetes and what, let's say in a very general way what it is. And she knows what my medicine is and that she's not supposed to touch it, but she can watch me kind of handle it, things like that. But this is only mama's territory to kind of handle things like that. So sometimes she likes to kind of look at my pump and to know what it does and things like that. But other than that, she doesn't know too many other details.
One of the things that when we were talking about coming on the show, I noticed that you're working with eGenesis. Can you tell me a little bit about who they are? eGenesis it's an amazing company. They don't only work on diabetes research, they work on, kidney disease and liver disease. And really their kind of primary goal is to make sure that there are no organ shortages for anyone who needs them. And so what they're working on is type 1 diabetes islet cell transplants. So they have an incredible immunology team, which I've been in touch with a bit. And it's very, very exciting, the research that they're doing. And my association with them really is to kind of spread the awareness of what it's truly like to live with type 1 diabetes and to stress the need for a cure. Because nowadays, with biotech making such amazing advances, sometimes people around me who don't know me so well look at me and they don't really even know that I have diabetes. And they say, oh, well, you make it look so easy. And it seems like with the technology, you can live a very, what do you need a cure for in a way? And this, of course, is exactly the wrong kind of message that you want to send. I said, well, yes, I'm a very positive person and I manage my diabetes as best I can. And I have the technology and the knowledge to do that. However, as we were saying before, living with type 1 diabetes is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week, 365-day-a-year job. Even with the technology, there's not a moment that goes by that you can really relax about it. You always have to be paying attention. I don't know how to look at a plate of food and not count the carbohydrates. And I don't know how to go for a run without thinking, okay, how is this going to affect my blood sugar? Is my pump actually going to react to, let's say, if I go for a sprint, how many glucose tablets do I have? Am I going to drop too low to actually finish it? That kind of thing. And that's even with the technology that we have now. Not to say nothing of hypoglycemic unawareness and all of these other things that we know are dangers with of living with type 1 diabetes. And you as a parent of a diabetic, of a type 1 diabetic who is luckily very well controlled, this is probably something that you were always concerned about, hypoglycemic unawareness overnight and things like that. I know that this was certainly something that my mother probably lost countless hours of sleep over, And type 1 diabetes is, to say nothing also of the expense of managing type 1 diabetes. We all know what insulin prices are. We know what the prescription medication needs are. And in fact, that type 1 diabetes is actually the most expensive chronic disease to treat of any chronic disease. And so this is really why we all need to be lobbying this and countless other reasons. This is why we are all lobbying for a cure, not treatment. I mean, of course, better treatment, but in the absence of a cure. But the ultimate goal, obviously, is a real cure. We didn't talk much about music during this interview. And I know you were here to talk about diabetes
okay.
and that sort of thing. But you have been playing, according to what I've read, you've really been playing since probably before you remember much, right? Did you start playing cello at age 4?
I did, yeah.
Is it still exciting? Is it still challenging? Is it still fun?
Oh, yes. And all of the above. Yes, challenging, exciting, fun, frustrating, wonderful. Tear my hair out, type of frustrating sometimes as well. But, it's one of those things where there's no concrete goal, really. I mean, you just have to keep growing. And in a way, there's a kind of a parallel with diabetes management there, too, because as we know, there's no way to do it perfectly. And you have to just do the best you can. And so that's like being an artist. You're constantly striving to be better, to be the most true to yourself, to the composer, to what you're trying to say. You're always searching for ways to do that better and to do it more clearly and to do it more honestly. I'm always experimenting.
Well, Alisa, thank you so much for joining me and for making time to talk about this. It's what a crazy time we're living in now. But I wish you the best as you're in Europe. But really, thank you so much for spending some time with me and my listeners.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
I will link up more information. You've got to hear Alisa play, so I'll put a lot of that in the show notes, a couple of different links, including, she mentioned that video where she is pregnant. I found that, and, she obviously looks great, but she plays with such passion in every video. I think you'll love it, so I'll definitely link those up. Whatever app you're listening to, if you're listening on an app, they always have show notes, and you can often get the links there as well. But if you have any trouble, as I always say, just go back to the homepage, and that will help you out. Tell me something good in just a moment. Did you hear the Dexcom at the Supreme Court? We're going to talk about that. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Gvoke HypoPen. And almost everyone who takes insulin has experienced a low blood sugar, and that can be scary. A very low blood sugar is really scary. And that's where Gvoke HypoPen comes in. It's the first auto-injector to treat very low blood sugar. Gvoke HypoPen is pre-mixed and ready to go with no visible needle. That means it's easy to use. In usability studies, 99% of people were able to give Gvoke correctly. I am so glad to have something new. Find out more. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Gvoke logo. Gvoke shouldn't be used in patients with pheochromocytoma or insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk. In Tell Me Something Good this week, let's talk about the Girl Scouts for a moment. This is all about Isabella. She was just diagnosed in April, and she is part of a Girl Scout troop. Her mom, Carrie, posted a photo, and I wanted to talk to her about that. It looked so great. And here's what happened. Isabella is part of a Girl Scout troop, and she did a presentation on diabetes for Diabetes Awareness Month. But this went a little bit further than a lot of the presentations that we have seen. And Isabella asked everybody to do a finger poke to experience a little bit of what she goes through. And I'm laughing because the photo that's posted, and I'll see if I can get permission to share this, is Isabella poking an adult's finger. And the adult is looking a little apprehensive, but there's this little girl in the background who just is very concerned. She's got this look on her face like, really? What? You have to do that all the time? It's a wonderful picture to show the empathy, I think, and really also, and this might sound a little bit flowery, but I mean this, the bravery of Isabella. It's not easy to show other people all the stuff that you have to go through when you have type 1. And, maybe her friends would be scared or maybe they would treat her differently. To have the support that she has, I think is really special. So, Carrie, thank you so much for sharing that. Isabella, congratulations to you for sharing all of that. And good on the Girl Scout troop. That's awesome. Our next Tell Me Something Good comes from the highest court in the land. Last week, the Supreme Court heard arguments about the Affordable Care Act. This is the third time in 8 years that the Obamacare, as it's also known, has been in front of the Supreme Court. But what I want to focus on is Justice Sonia Sotomayor's Dexcom. Yes, of course, many of you already know that one of the justices lives with type 1 diabetes. If you haven't read her incredible biography, I will link that up in the show notes. And yes, she is one of my dream guests. So somebody help make that happen for us. I've reached out to the press office. I'm going to continue to work it. We'll get her on one of these days. But her Dexcom apparently went off. Christelle Aprigliano heard it. She is an incredible diabetes advocate, and she was the very first guest on this show. Yeah, back in 2015. And she tweeted out that she had heard it. She thought it was her Dexcom going off, but it was Justice Sotomayor's. And that sparked a little bit of conversation about why would it be going off? Is a clerk going to bring her a juice box? And isn't it frustrating that you can't silence all the alarms? And why would you want to silence all the alarms? And it was interesting to hear people go back and forth about that. One thing that did come up, if you do want to silence the alarms, and look, I know we want that urgent low to be going off, but you are grown-ups as you listen, and a lot of people do not want it blaring at their workplace, or they want to have a different way of doing this, right? We all want our DIY stuff. If you don't already know, one workaround is to stick headphones into the jack on your phone, and then the alarm will go off, but it'll go off in the headphones, and it won't bother anybody else at work. As a mom, I don't want you to turn your urgent low alarm off. I mean, come on, I'm a mom, but I get it. So that was one thing that came up. But isn't that interesting? I have all sorts of personal and prying questions for Justice Sotomayor. Maybe that's why she doesn't want to come on and talk to me about, like, hey, where do you put your Dexcom? Do you use skin tack? Right? We would have more important things to talk about, I am sure. If you have a Tell Me Something Good story, please send it my way, Stacey@diabetes-connections.com, or post it in the Facebook group, Diabetes Connections, the group. I feel like this month has been busier, and not just because it's Diabetes Awareness Month. I'm actually, there's stuff going on. I'm doing panels, I'm taping things more than the podcast. So it's kind of fun, and I'm feeling more energized than I have been in a while, which is nice. This weekend, I'm participating in the Healthy Voices Conference. This was supposed to be in the spring. I think it was supposed to be in Dallas. I mean, I can't even keep track of the number of airline tickets I had to reschedule, like most of you. But I'm excited because I'm not just talking about diabetes. I'm actually not even talking about diabetes. I'm talking about podcasting, and I'm talking about teaching podcasting. And I will be teaching health advocates, patient leaders, how to podcast and how easy it is, not to be afraid of it, how their voices are so important. But truly, it's not an esoteric, why you should podcast or your voice matters, which it very much does. It is down and dirty. You plug this microphone into this program. Here's how you get your RSS feed on Apple. I'm thrilled to be doing this. And if, as you listen, if you know somebody who wants to hear more about that stuff, podcasting is obviously my passion, and I love helping more people get started. As this episode airs, I believe it'll be tonight. I am taping something that will be for air in December. It's the annual Wait, Don't Poke Me, which is a game show that I do for Friends for Life. It is a takeoff of the NPR show Wait, Don't Tell Me. I love it so much. We have so much goofy fun, and you'll be able to hear that. You'll be able to watch that, if not at the conference in December, shortly thereafter. I'll make it public. We always have a good time. Please remember that all this month you can get The World's Worst Diabetes Mom, Real Life Stories of Raising a Child with Type 1 Diabetes, for a big discount, $4 off at diabetes-connections.com. Use the promo code November. It makes a nice gift for the holidays. Boy, I'm so bad at this advertising stuff. But you can go ahead and read the reviews on Amazon. You can purchase it on Amazon as an audiobook or an ebook, or head over to my website and get the discount. And I forgot to mention, if you buy it off my website, I'll sign it for you. There's a little form on the very bottom of the order form. When you fill it out, it'll say order notes, and just put, if you want me to personalize it or anything you want me to write, I'll sign them all. But if you put it in there, I will personalize it for you. Thank you, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.